How about a $700 gaming PC build guide? Now I know what you're thinking, Greg, building a PC hasn't changed largely in like 20 plus years. What's the point? Well, sometimes we have new viewers come by and sometimes it doesn't hurt to have a quick refresher. So we'll be showing you step-by-step how to assemble something just like this. Follow along with the parts in the description. Hopefully by the end of the video, you'll have a nice, happy working system. Are you ready? Stay with me. Now, if you're building a PC like we are, then consider checking out our sponsor, VIP SCD Key. Their Windows 10 and 11 OEM keys sell for a fraction of retail and will unlock the full potential of the OS. They'll also remove those pesky activation watermarks without relying on sketchy third-party software. This month only, you can snag Windows 10 and 11 Home and Pro OEM keys for 30% off using our promo code GSVIP. Simply click the link below corresponding to your version of Windows, click Buy Now, and pay with a secure payment method like PayPal. At checkout, don't forget our code again, GSVIP, and watch as 30% ripped right off the top, bringing Windows 10 down to $15 and Windows 11 down to $21. After your order's been placed, hop on over to the User Center and click View Keys/Codes, and there you have it, a genuine OEM Windows key that'll lock to your combination of hardware. Just note that you may need to reactivate when swapping things like motherboards by nature of how OEM keys work, but it sure beats the heck out of retail pricing. And be sure to stick around till later when we'll show you how to activate Windows with said key. In the meantime, check out those links below and don't forget our special discount code GSVIP to save 30%. So here is everything unboxed and we're gonna walk you through each of our parts choices step by step. I have, full disclosure, purchased everything myself for this rig. We haven't had any company send anything and just wanted to do that to prove a point that if I was using my own money, this is exactly what I would build in the $700 price range. Now we did go with Intel instead of AMD. It's always a toss-up, especially in this price range. Both platforms are really good. I actually went with a slightly older, new Intel platform. So this is an 11th gen CPU, but you could go with something a bit newer if you wanted to, sacrifice more of your budget for a higher end CPU. That's gonna cut a bit into your graphics card though, so you'll have to weigh your use case with, again, the prices of each of these components. This I think is gonna be fairly balanced for 1080p and 1440p gaming. So this CPU only cost us just over $100, not too bad there. The graphics card we chose was an MSI Ventus 3060. I know right away some of you are thinking, well, Greg, why are you using an MSI component? You just said that like a few months ago, you weren't gonna be using MSI ever again. We have altered our stance on that just a little bit. Yes, we are still pretty upset with the way MSI handled that entire situation. We'll have that video linked below if you're interested. But especially after the recent Asus fiasco, the EK fiasco, I mean, like, if you really think about it, if we start just like completely blacklisting companies for doing wrong, we're not gonna have any components to build with. It's, at the end of the day, every component has done something pretty screwed up in the past. My MO is going to be to reject any monetary compensation from the brands that we have immediate concerns and problems with. So in the case of MSI, we haven't accepted money since that video was released from them, and that's why, again, I've gone ahead and chosen this here. Might not be everyone's cup of tea. Our stance might anger some folks, but it is what it is. We've had to make some tough decisions recently. We've gone with an ASRock B560M motherboard. This is an MATX board, and we've complemented that with an MATX case from Deepcool. This one's actually pretty airflowy, looks to be designed very well, and it doesn't break the bank. We've gone with an APVIA Prestige power supply. 550 watts should be enough for this combination of hardware. I actually have an aftermarket ID cooling. I call it aftermarket. It's an IS40X. I love ID cooling products. I think they're great bang for the buck, and we've also got a 16 gig kit of Corsair DDR4 Vengeance LPX memory. The last piece to this puzzle is KuCat PSU sleeved cables. Raymond's trying not to laugh. I'm just gonna go ahead and laugh right off the bat. This is an interesting name. I didn't know that these were actually called that when I ordered it. I don't think the brand name was actually listed on Amazon at the time. But these are just custom cable extensions. They're actually silver. That's gonna match some of the silver accents in this ASRock motherboard and the MSI graphics card. I think it'll look good when it's all said and done, but well, we have to actually build the system first to find that out. So then, to kick things off, we'll start with our motherboard. We're gonna use the box as a sort of test bench. We're gonna take this out and assemble pretty much our entire platform on top of this. In we go. We can toss this to the side. Most of this we won't need in the immediate. You'll probably find your motherboard in a sort of anti-static bag like this. Now this is just barely an MATX board. This is actually a pretty small one. Some of these are a bit longer than this. So we're going to, again, set it just on top of the box like so, and then we're gonna get two other things, our CPU and our DDR4. Now this CPU actually comes with its own cooler. We could have used that in place of the one we ordered if we wanted, but the stock Intel ones typically aren't that great, so we're going to forego it in this build. The way that they assemble this is always interesting. We're gonna take this cooler out. You can see it actually looks a bit better than, well, they used to, so Intel's done a bit of a job there, but again, not really interested. We're going to carefully pull the CPU out here. It's gonna be in a small plastic container like this. We'll pop it open, and then we'll grab it on either side like this. Make sure that the pads are all clean. Now, the one thing I want you to mind here is the location of the golden triangle. In this case, it's gonna be to the bottom left with the text oriented upright. This is what we're going to align with the triangle on the motherboard to ensure that our CPU is oriented properly when we put it in the socket. You can see our socket cover also has this arrow, in case you're wondering. We're gonna pull back on this retention clip and expose the socket. Now be very careful, don't touch any of the small pins in here. We're going to align the orientation of that triangle with what's on the CPU. You can see the chip is also notched, so it should only slide in one way. We just like to focus on the triangle because that's a telltale sign of what's to come. Then we're gonna push down on the retention arm. This is gonna take quite a bit of force, and we're gonna lock it underneath the socket itself, or the bracket that surrounds the socket. So there's gonna be a lot of tension here. That's totally normal. Just again, make sure that your CPU is correctly inserted into the socket and you shouldn't have any problems. Now, whether you're building a DDR4 system or a DDR5, the one thing you wanna pay attention here is the notch on each DIMM. Now, in the case of DDR4, it's gonna be slightly offset to the right in this orientation, and you'll see that in each of the DIMM slots on the motherboard, the same little notch exists. So this will only slide in one way, super important there, but other than that, installation should be pretty simple. In this case, we only have two DIMM slots, so both will be populated, pretty straightforward. Pull back on these tabs. We're gonna get the notch aligned with what is in the slot. And we're gonna push down firmly on one corner until we hear a click, and then we're gonna push firmly down on the other until we hear that second click. We'll do the exact same thing for the slot behind it. Our platform is almost complete. We're gonna tackle the CPU cooler next, but I do wanna mention one of the downsides of such a cheap motherboard is the fact that we don't have an M.2 slot. So I'm sure some of you earlier were wondering why we only went with a 2.5-inch SSD and not an M.2 SSD. And the reason why is because we don't have that ability here. So we just are gonna be using the SATA interface. Not a huge deal, just something to note. You might have to make a compromise or two like that in a budget this tight. Here's our ID cooling cooler, and well, it is pretty small. It actually isn't much larger than the stock Intel cooler, but this will still perform a lot better and perform quieter. Thankfully, they've labeled which bag is for which platform. We've obviously chosen the Intel platform, so we're gonna use this baggie, but if you wanna know how to step-by-step install this CPU, you'll have an installation guide in the box. We're not gonna run through this because this is very cooler dependent, but any cooler for the most part will have something like this that you can follow along with. Now, the one bad thing about small coolers like this is they often have interesting install methods. So for this one, when I go ahead and apply the thermal paste to the top of the CPU, do not forget this step. You need thermal paste. This will help with heat transfer between the IHS and the cooler itself. Ooh, this is like really milky. Not sure about this paste, but we'll roll with it for now. I think temperatures on this particular chip will be fine either way. And yeah, so this is the tricky part. We actually have to put the cooler down first, like so. And then we have to flip the board over and align the board like so to where the holes surrounding the socket align with those threads on the cooler. And then we take these bigger Phillips screws and we thread them through from, well, in this orientation above, but really we're underneath the motherboard. Kind of get these started, and then we can fully tighten them down with a large Phillips screw. Yeah, this is just it's just one of those things. It's just one of those things. So also make sure to cross tighten so that thermal paste spreads evenly underneath the cold plate. Then connect your CPU fan cable, should look something like this, to the header on the board labeled CPU fan. You could technically connect this anywhere, but it will be easiest if it's connected to the CPU fan header. It is keyed, so it'll only slide in one way. In this case, it's a PWM fan, so it has 4 pins, and that'll give us pretty liberal control over the fan RPM. Now that this is all buttoned up, it's time to move on to the case. We're gonna prep for the merge between the platform and the case itself. One thing you can do to quickly get things ready is just to lay it down flat where the left side is exposed and facing upward. Make sure that all your fan cables and things that are already installed in the case are out of the way. And before we move forward, we're gonna install our rear I/O shield. I legit almost forgot this on camera. Many newer boards will have this piece pre-installed, so if it looks like you've got a shield like this around your rear I/O ports, then you probably don't need to worry about this step. But cheaper motherboards, older motherboards, will usually require that you install this before your board goes in. It's not something that you absolutely need, but it just helps things look a little cleaner back here. And while holding on to the CPU cooler, I'm going to align the rear I/O ports on the motherboard with those cutouts in that shield. I'm also going to reference the standoffs included in this case. I just realized I installed the rear I/O shield upside down. Wow. That was silly. I cannot believe I just made that mistake. For reference, so that you don't do what I just did, always try to find your audio section. In this case, it's not just 3 circles, which is what it usually is. That's why I was confused. But that is usually going to be closer toward your PCI slots here. So it's a good way to know which way this goes. You could also just, literally look at the back of the board and figure out the orientation. All right, I think we are now ready for that motherboard install. Gonna set it in gently and use those standoffs for a bit of extra support. You can see this standoff here in particular actually punches through the board a little bit, so once it's in place, it'll actually hold the entire board there as well. Next, grab screws that look like this and tighten down that board. And at this point, it's starting to look a lot more like a full PC build. Now, the next part here is going to be a little tedious. This is debatably the worst part of building a PC, and that is small wiring. So things like USB 2 and USB 3, USB Type-C if applicable, HD audio, and your front panel. So your power button, your reset button if you have one, power LED, and hard drive LED. We'll start first with front panel. That's gonna be this header here on this board. Refer to your motherboard's manual if you're using something a bit different. Worst case, you're not gonna be able to power your system on if these small wires are connected in other places. We have a dedicated video describing how to do this in more detail if you're interested. We're just gonna run through this very quickly here because again, that video is so much more concise. This is just very difficult to get on camera without a special environment. Next is HD audio, which is slightly higher than a normal position on this board. This will allow things like your headphone and microphone jacks to work. And lastly, for this case, our USB 3 cable. These headers are a little stubborn, so just be gentle with them. And that'll do it for case wiring. Time for our SSD. It's been a while since I've worked with a 2.5-inch drive as a boot drive. Usually you can find M.2s that are similar storage capacities for around the same price as these. But again, we were limited by the board, and I don't think it's the end of the world here. These are still much faster than spinning disks. And on that note, I was able to find this 1 terabyte drive for about the same price as a 1 terabyte spinning disk. That's not too bad. Storage has come down quite a bit in price over the past few years. This one actually looks pretty cool too. You can see it's a Vulkan Z drive, and I think we're gonna be able to orient this in our case such that we can see it through the left side panel. Deepcool have given us these small standoffs to screw into the bottom of our 2.5-inch drive. You can see they have this little ridge toward the top, and if you follow me this way, Raymond, all we need to do is slide this straight in to these included rubber standoffs, like so. And there we go. It just kind of sits like that. And I think we can run our power and SATA data cables through this top cutout. Not entirely sure it's gonna work that way, but we're gonna give it a shot. Don't forget your SATA data cable. There should be one in your motherboard's box. We'll connect it to this port here, and of course the other end to that SATA drive. It is power supply time. This is from a brand called APVIA. I looked up this specific unit on Cultist PSU tier website, is rated around a C, which isn't the worst for a budget, around $700. I'm not gonna complain about C-tier units. We're gonna get this unboxed and we're gonna slide it into our case. Non-modular units will also be among the cheapest you can buy. Another reason why you might prefer one for this caliber budget. Now this case does have ventilation at the bottom, so we're gonna orient our power supply fan here. That's this area with the grill. You can see the fan underneath. We're gonna orient that downward so that our power supply has its own stream of air unhindered by anything else going on above. We don't have many fans at all connected to this unit, connected to the entire build, I should say. So we're just gonna do our best to keep this as isolated as possible. Now grab 4 screws that look like this that came with your case and fasten it down from the rear. Now we'll start with the 24 pin that looks like this right here, and we'll connect it right here. Just mind the notch section. There's gonna be a clip on the cable itself. I want that clip to be aligning with this side. It's going to be hard to see from that angle, but it'll only go in one way, so don't worry about doing this backwards. So we're just going to carefully fasten this down, then we can worry about cable managing this a bit later. Next cable on the list is our 8-pin EPS. This is going to supply power directly to our CPU. This should be listed as either CPU or EPS on the connector itself. Unfortunately, it is not labeled on this one for some reason, but one way you can tell that this is what it is and not the PCIe 8-pin is that it actually splits down the middle. This is also keyed uniquely so that you can't technically slam this into supplemental PCIe power port on a graphics card, for example. So we're going to install this all the way up here. This is going to be on the top left side of the motherboard, pretty close to the socket. And again, this is keyed only one way. There's also a clip on one side, actually on the top part of this, that we're going to line up with the clip on the cable. Last for now is SATA power. Now there's going to be something called Molex power as well that we won't need for this particular build. It looks like this here, 4 large connectors, but we're going to ignore that because we don't have anything that relies on that here. We just have to connect one of these to the 2.5-inch drive in our case. And Raymond, if you want to swing on over, you can show them we've already got ours installed. It's just being run through the small little cutout here next to the front I/O in the case. And the last thing on our agenda is this lovely looking graphics card. Again, triple fan model. Actually found this for a decent price, although I will say the one area of this budget you could definitely save money and still get a lot of performance is the graphics card. You can find so many great used graphics cards today. Now, I wanted an NVIDIA card specifically because we've used a lot of AMD cards in the past for budget rigs. It's very easy to find like 6650 XTs and 6750 XTs, etc. from AMD that are great value propositions. But with NVIDIA, it's a bit more difficult to find new cards for good prices. Now, this is a generation old by this point, but I actually found the triple fan model on Amazon for cheaper than the dual fan model. I think this was like around 250 bucks. For a new card, that's not terrible, and between this and a 4060, you actually get more RAM here, so maybe you prefer this one anyway. In she goes then, very carefully. We're gonna align the golden fingers on the card with the slot. This part's pretty straightforward, and of course it is keyed. We're gonna snap it all the way in. Make sure that you pull back on this retention arm before installing, and then it should flip back forward once the card is fully in place. Tighten the graphics card down with the 2 Phillips screws that we removed to take out the slot covers. Next, we'll connect the 8-pin PCIe cable here. This one actually is labeled. You can see on this side here, it says PCIe. This is going to insert here like so. Now, depending on the card you choose, yours could either have a single 8-pin like this one, it could have 2 8-pins, it could have a single 6-pin. I've seen very strange config, including like 2 6-pins. I think some GTX 970s and older cards had that config as well. So depending on the card you choose, that could vary, but here it's pretty straightforward, just a single 8, and our power supply again is more than capable of supplying enough power to run this setup. Now, it does look pretty cool as it is. At this point, we would call it and attempt to power the system on, but we forgot one thing. Our KuCat cables. I can't say this name with a straight face. I think that these silver accents are going to help the rig pop a bit more because if you want to show them again, Raymond, it just looks a little bland. Like there's a lot of black in here and there's very little of anything else. And maybe you like that sort of like stealthy look, but I'm after something a little more. And the cool thing is these custom cable extensions only cost about 18 bucks. Some would argue that 18 bucks could be better spent on maybe a beefier CPU cooler or a more expensive graphics card. I don't think 18 bucks is gonna make much of a difference in either of those budgets. I mean, we don't really need a beefy CPU cooler anyway because we're going with a 11400 1100F. Is it 1100F? I already forgot what CPU we're going with. Core i5, pretty basic Core i5 at that. Plus, I mean, come on, look at these cables. Look how cool they look. And for you first-time builders, all these do is connect in line with your stock PSU cables. So all these are literally just extensions of what is already being run from the unit. So you don't have to worry about any special adapters or things. These literally connect straight in, and then you'll see this side here is the exact same connector that we had on the power supply side. So we'll run this into our motherboard, and we'll do this for all of the primary connections, the 8-pin EPS and the PCIe as well. Now there are a couple things I wish I could do a bit differently about this cable management now that we have the extensions in. It was a lot cleaner before. This is just gonna add more length to have to deal with. We've got some extras stowed down in the hard drive cage. But one trick, if you don't have enough torque, or well, not torque, but you know what I mean, like enough force to get the side panel on with the case standing up, just lay it down flat. Then you can take your forearm, spread it across the panel, then slide it into position, tighten it down, so you're, able to use your body weight more or less to get this in place. And yeah. Oh yeah, that looks so much better. We are ready to power on. I think we've got everything wired. So we've got power on at the rear, and we're gonna click the power button up front. Okay, bit of a delay. Fans are spinning all across the board. That's always a good sign. At least cheaper motherboards aren't gonna have debug LEDs or Dr. Debug screens, notifiers. So we're gonna have to connect this to a portable monitor and make sure that everything functions as it should and that we get a proper post. Post stands for Power On Self-Test, and it's a way for the system to quickly check and verify that all of the components connected are in fact working. You can see we've got that post, we've got a picture on screen, we've loaded into the BIOS, which is exactly where we need to be. The next step from here is going to be to install Windows, whatever your preferred operating system is. A majority of users are going to prefer either Windows 10 or 11. And then after that, just install your drivers. Graphics drivers are going to be your biggest one. If you need maybe Ethernet drivers, internet drivers in general, maybe you have a Wi-Fi adapter, Bluetooth adapter, you might need to have those. Once the internet drivers are taken care of, then you can use your own PC that you just built to download everything else. So those are going to be the 2 or 3 crucial ones, and from there pick the programs that you'd like, and yeah, happy gaming, I guess. Let's say you've gotten as far as we have, and maybe you're wondering what comes next. Of course, installing Windows, we have a dedicated video walking you through step by step how to take care of that. It'll be linked below if you're interested. But the very next thing after that should be to activate Windows. And if you've already gotten a key from VIP SCD Key, your next step should be to copy said key and navigate to the Activation tab within Windows settings. You can get there quickly by typing Activate in the Search tab and clicking Enter. From here, click Change or Add Product Key, paste your code, allow Windows to run its checks, and then click Activate. Give it a minute and you should notice your watermark disappear along with a message that Windows has been successfully activated. If you're having issues with your key, triple check that you've entered it correctly and that it corresponds to your version of Windows. This is especially important for OEM keys, which is why we stressed this earlier. VIP SCD Key sales happening now and for a limited time, so be sure to snag a key or two before it's too late, and be sure to use our special offer code GSVIP for a sweet discount on a variety of options, including Windows 10, Windows 11, and more. Now, as this is more of a build guide, we're not going to spend too much time talking about performance here. There are plenty of videos online detailing how a 3060 and an 11400F communicate. Any Core i5 paired with a 60 series NVIDIA graphics card, as long as they're within similar generations, at least in terms of when they were released, they are going to do very well when it comes to 1080p and 1440p. This being an RTX graphics card means we're going to be able to take advantage of DLSS as well, which might be an added bonus if you play games that include that support. When it comes to 3D Mark Time Spy performance, we find an average score of around 8,500, allowing us to perform better than roughly 40% of all submitted results here. I think for a system that was put together with all new parts in a $700 budget, that isn't too bad at all. If you'd like to build something very similar to this, I'm gonna have all of these components linked in the video description, tied to our Amazon affiliate account, which gives us a very small kickback if you buy something through any of those links. If you wanna make tweaks, alterations, feel free to do that. Pick and choose whatever you may. Hopefully this short little tutorial has clarified a few things if you're a first-time builder, and if you've built several in the past. A refresher every now and then doesn't hurt. Leave feedback in the comment section below, letting us know what you thought about this this combination here, what again you would do differently, and stick around for the next one. My name is Greg. Thanks for learning with me.